imagine what those in the queue at the moment, what their bodies are telling them. No, why did I think of doing this? No, actually, by the look of it, all of the people in the queue to go to Westminster Hall and the people who are filing past at the moment, there they are. We're seeing again another view of Westminster Hall. You can only imagine that those people are thrilled that they actually did get there in the end. So many waiting on the steps just to go down to walk past.
It's worth it, isn't it? I mean, that's what everyone is saying. It looks like a pause in the queue there, which would mean another changing of the guard. I don't quite know why, but they're changing the guard every 20 minutes, which seems quite a lot. Quite a regular change,
yes,
isn't it?
Except that they don't want anyone fainting there. It must be, well, they say that under the lights it is quite hot there. But also, I don't know, you were telling us that, you know, if they've got gloves that have been hardened with emulsion and, you know, and so stiff and starched, all those uniforms, it must be quite a stress standing there, rock solid for 20 minutes. Obviously, that's been worked out, that's reasonable. Do you know, it also gives everybody in the queue, though, waiting,
a chance to see
this amazing changing of the guard.
Do you think people have timed their place in the queue?
No.
For later this evening, for 7:30? I just wonder, because to think that they can be there when the royal family are there.
I don't know if it's...
I don't think you can.
What I can't quite understand with this is whether the public will be allowed in at that point, because they were talking earlier on about that being private for, private for them and private for the grandchildren on Saturday. So I don't know if the public will be allowed in for that.
Do you think so? Because I just thought there'd be enough time for their privacy there, but when the Queen is lying in state and then the crowds are coming through, of course we saw it in Scotland, didn't we?
Yes.
And can you imagine actually getting there and thinking, what I'm seeing in front of me?
That must be remarkable.
Yeah.
This is a real piece of history. So that changing of the guard is really quite a lovely thing to see, and people just standing so quietly as that happens before they're allowed to continue on.
And the faces there of the people waiting their moment, but getting that extra thrill of seeing the changing of the guard, waiting to file past. They are witnessing something that they can't even have imagined. But they've probably been in queues for 9 hours or so. It might not be that much, but they are saying now that the queue will take about 9 hours.
No, 11 hours it's gone up.
Was that? It's gone up to 11?
It's gone up to 11.
Oh my goodness.
So, and it's 4 miles, so it's going all the way back to Bermondsey.
The only thing I was thinking of is if you've come from outside London and you're not used to seeing these amazing landmarks of which we're so proud, at least you get a good view going along the river, don't you?
Yeah.
And it looks as though it's going to be a fairly nice day. You get to see all the bridges and you get to see the London Eye, and you're walking past, and then you walk past on the other side of the river, you're walking past Parliament, so you can see it in that view there from the river, looking golden, actually, in the sunshine.
Lovely.
Yeah. And then you go over the bridge and then into Victoria Gardens, where you then, when you just think it's in sight, then you get the zigzaggy. But nobody seems to mind. By the time they get there, they can see the hall in front of them. They can see where they're going. That keeps you going, I suppose.
I suppose it does. It's a lot of patience. What bridge are they walking over? Is that Lambeth Bridge?
No, it's... Yes.
Yeah.
It is Lambeth Bridge, yeah.
Anyway, well look, we're going to change tack slightly as we go through the papers with Benjamin Butterworth from the newspaper and journalist Ella Whelan, who are back. Good to see you, because we're looking at 1 or 2 different stories to kick off with. We also forget anything else is going on, don't we? And the Star, Ella, looking at poor millionaire bankers.
Yes, that's really good.
Shame. What's happening to them?
It's a really good front page there with Kwasi Kwarteng, so pray for the poor millionaire bankers. The thing about this is that you're right, it does feel like there's nothing else going on, but in fact there is a huge amount going on, and the cost of living crisis hasn't stopped and hasn't stopped frightening people and making them worried just because we are in a period of national mourning. So the bits that come out, but lots of politicians are sort of stood still at the moment, and so the bits of information that we get about what kind of plans are coming really become quite crucial when there's nothing happening. And so this message from Kwarteng that essentially that the cap on bankers' bonuses that has been in place since the 2008 financial crisis will be lifted, not, in the way Kwarteng is describing it, not because, the Tories are sort of lovers of the fat cat kind of bankers, but because, as he puts it, it will make London attractive to big hitters and boost the economy. It's just kind of an attempt to sort of shortcut towards doing something in relation to boosting the economy. But, I think it's incredibly tone deaf. I mean, it just does not sit well with people to hear that when they're going to have to be, choosing between heating and eating, is the phrase we keep hearing, that there's going to be bankers who already have eye-watering paychecks raking in even more.
So, what are they capped at the moment? Do we know?
No, it doesn't say in the paper, but there's the understanding of it is that part of what's happening in the UK is that Britain is becoming a very sort of looking very unfavourable to people who want to come in and create business here and particularly in the financial market because of the narrative around the cost of living crisis, and this is some way to boost it. But the really important point is just that you cannot simply fiddle with finances at the higher end, or indeed engage in the whole discussion about tax cuts or things like that. It's not going to do anything to increase production, and the problem with the economy.
No, but it will boost tax revenue, won't it?
But it's one of these things that is sort of like you're juggling balls in the air, taking a bit from here, taking a bit from there. It's sort of like fiddling with finances rather than actually making any kind of concrete, substantial difference to the economy.
Well, before we run out of time, let's look to something else that has been announced by the government, and that is that Liz Truss is going to lift the fracking ban despite lack of progress on the research as to whether they really do cause problems with tremors.
That's right. So there was a leaked report which said that there are still concerns about the fact that it could cause things like minor earthquakes if you have fracking. But no, Liz Truss is going to end that ban very soon, which is a breach of the 2019 Tory manifesto on the one hand. On the other, it's something that she said during her Tory leadership race. So it's something that party members voted for, and there are concerns about whether or not this is safe. Now, of course, we have a shortage of energy supply. That's at the heart of how it's become so incredibly expensive. But then new energy that comes on stream will still be charged at the same rate, and some of this could indeed be sold abroad because that's the nature of the market it will be entering and the rules in it. So, there are concerns about the safety of people in these areas, but also there's another nuance to this, which is that local people would have to approve for fracking to happen. Now, it seems pretty unlikely
that there's going to be consensus.
All the other things that local people in local areas seem to not want on their doorstep. I suspect fracking could well be blocked in that way.
But there's a lot of, certainly Blackpool's one of the areas where, there are some people who are very vocally opposed to fracking, but there are a lot of people who want it because it's a boost for the local economy and it's desperate for it.
But
I think that might go through.
But when they hear concerns about the potential effect on the environment where they live...
But they've heard all of that before.
I think we just want energy now, don't we?
Energy, jobs and income.
Can I just ask one thing about both of those headlines, both of those stories are pretty unsavoury. They're not very nice, they're going to be controversial. Is this tone deafness on part of government announcing it today, or are they burying bad news behind an enormous headline?
Could be the case, but I think one of the things about the way in which we handle announcements from the government during this time is that, life hasn't stopped for most people, particularly in relation to, I think I'd even go as far as to say that it's pretty disgraceful that people are going to be faced the energy bills that they're going to face on the 1st of October with little to no information from the government. There surely is some kind of way in which we can pay respect and do the kind of traditional historical thing in relation to the Queen, and have people working behind the scenes to have some kind of information coming out.
There must be.
But the Star reports that the mini budget isn't going to come until next Friday. There's news in other papers about plans for how to deal with energy cost rises that aren't going to be announced for another week or two. And a week or two is a huge amount of time for people at the moment.
What's this in the eye about energy bills and that the help is just too late? Who's warning about that?
Well, this is some executives in some of sort of energy-intensive industries. So the kind of industries that are going to need. You've actually on this show talked a lot about sort of the smaller end of that, which is people like fish and chip shops and things like that, but also right up to the kind of factories that are going to have to run use huge amounts of energy all day, have announced that simply the plans are too little, too late. In fact, the £150 billion package that has been pledged to businesses isn't going to come until November. So there's the individual side of people who are going to be sitting in the dark and the cold worrying about how much their energy bills are rising. But there's also going to be the business end, which is that if you think about all the shops, the industries, the people who are manufacturing cars, all these kinds of things, they need help in terms of the energy rising.
Help now.
Yeah.
You know, I do think what's tone deaf is that the government has put out that they're going to end this bankers' bonus cap. Of all the things that they would choose to communicate in this period when they're not really meant to be announcing anything, the idea that it would be that and not some clearer indication of the energy price changes, for example, that they announced in the hours as
Well, that's why I asked
dark.
if they hadn't deliberately buried that, announced it now while we're all thinking of the Queen.
I think if they were going to announce anything, it should be the things that are going to help
Well,
people
of
put food on the table.
Have they announced it, or is it just Kwasi Kwarteng being asked about it and he's had to? I mean, let's make sure we don't.
But I think that, I think that first of all, he should know better than to say it in this period of 10 days. It is not the protocol. But it's not an accident, he doesn't inadvertently say something like this. These things don't get in the newspapers entirely by mistake at a time like this. And I just think that, the one good decision that's coming is that the period for conferences, the party conferences, the recess, so when Parliament isn't sitting, they're knocking that shorter by a week so that they can try and make up some of this week and a bit.
Surely all we want to hear from the government at the moment is, as soon as this period of mourning is finished, we will lay out comprehensive plans for helping people. That's all we really want to hear from them at the moment, isn't it?
It is. I mean, look, it's very unfortunate timing, in that sense, because of the Tory leadership process, it was already the case that any package they announced, it takes about 6 weeks, they estimate, for them to sort of get it all together in reality. And so to add another sort of 2 weeks to that, maybe longer, because they're about to go into a month-long recess, basically, this help is coming long after the effects of it are being felt with that October price rise.
There's also some kind of, Benjamin is right in saying that obviously no one can help the timing of this. You get a new Prime Minister and you lose a monarch in, pretty much the same 24 hours or whatever it was. But there is a sort of boring procedural problem behind all of this, which is that because there is going to have to be, a changeover in ministers, within departments, that there has to be changeover in staff in terms of civil servants and changes of briefs, all of that has been put on hold. And one of the things that civil servants are sort of told not to do is you don't take direction from an old minister in a new period. And so there's sort of this kind of intensely boring bureaucratic sort of procedural thing that is actually holding up the making and preparing of policies. So we might get to the end of the mourning period and actually there's sort of things like a mundane kind of backlog of paperwork to go through.
So suspend the party conferences.
Well, the Lib Dems have had to, because theirs would have fallen during the period. As far as I'm aware, the other parties are going to go ahead. Look, I think the conferences should go ahead because they rely financially on them, but also they're a window for those parties, Tory and Labour, i.e., to announce their plans to the country, right, which is important. But you wonder whether, some of
They don't need the conferences.
They don't need the jollies, do they?
Public.
No.
No, I don't know. I'm with you, I think scrap it all, get on with business.
That's what we need now, yeah.
Look, Benjamin, Ella, thank you. We'll catch up with you a little bit later on.